Hey, what's happening, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We have a really fun project to do today. It's something I've researched for quite a while. It's a part I've had on the shelf for quite a while, and I've been thinking about it for quite a while. And there's only a handful of good write-ups, if that. There's one that if you search like Jeep TJ fuel cell install or write-up on NC 4x4, someone did a pretty decent write-up on it. I really like his methods and stuff. And then there's a couple good installation videos. Something I've already been started working on is the mounting of the fuel cell. So first off, I'm using the Motobuilt 19-gallon. This is the one that's specifically made for the TJ. I went with this one because the stock tank in the 03 to 06s is a 19-gallon. So I just figured that would keep everything kosher, so to speak. And yeah, it does take up quite a bit back here, but I'm going to mount it in the front because I think I'll have a better time using my trunk still as like some sort of storage. This is about 18 inches here, and I guess I'll kind of explain the basis of how I have it mounted, because there is a real reason that it is mounted up there and specifically where it is. And then I'll show you some tips and tricks on what I'm doing. But I think what I'm going to do is actually just put the camera down, go ahead and get it mounted, and then show you guys what I did and talk about it. Alright, so here's an update on my mounting solution here. I went and got some 3/4 by 1/8 thick flat stock, and I drilled out my holes here. And I did move. You can see I re-drilled this hole. This is so that this plate fits between the ridges in the trunk of the TJ. So the distance between this outer hole and my new hole is 3 inches, or it's 3 5/8 inches. So I did that, copied it over to this pieces of flat stock here. This one, it's going to make more sense later why this one is a full length, and then over here I have individual ones. So one of these rows of bolts actually sits in the cross member of the body where the seat bolts to the body, and so I know it's going to be really strong that way. And then also having these sandwich plates is going to prevent this whole thing from ripping through the sheet metal. I would definitely advise using like a fender washer, or at the very least you need to use washers for something like this. The sheet metal back there is very thin, and so in a really violent crash you don't want this fuel tank coming out. And so this way, that'll prevent anything from ripping through the sheet metal. And then furthermore, I'm actually going to weld those bolts to that plate. There's a few more other plates that we're going to weld bolts to make life really nice. And that way these will just stick up through the floor, and we'll have some studs ready to just bolt this thing down, and it'll make it super easy for future maintenance. And it actually also is nice that it'll keep the threads up in the Jeep instead of the threads hanging down below. And it should make it easier to protect the threads and get these things off in the future. Here is the fuel cell, right there. It's on the ground. In its current state, I've had these, I have the rings in there, the sandwich rings with these bolts that are welded on. I have some clips of that I will insert here. All right, so I've got my bracket re-drilled out, and now this is gonna be a really good trick for if you have a welder and you're doing this project. This is gonna come in handy for many future projects, but this is gonna come in handy a lot for this project. So on the fuel cell, you have a ton of these clamping rings to bolt to the top of the cell. And so one of the biggest tricks we're going to do here is actually weld the bolts to like the plates that I made here, these plates, and the fuel pump ring. We're going to weld the bolts to the bottom side, so that way the studs are just going to be sticking up, and you don't have to reach in awkwardly from different angles and things like that to tighten stuff up. It's just going to make this whole project just so much nicer to like service in the future, and just it's just going to look really nice as well. So one thing I'm making sure to do is to clean up the surface here where each bolt is going to be in, and that way I can tack weld on either side and reduce some of the spatter and stuff. So we got the fuel door or cap thing, whatever, done. I got my little sandwich plates done, and I'm priming the big base plate. So we're moving along here, coming along nicely. Specific notes about these mounting locations. I did have to remove the front set of hooks here. This is an 03, so this might be a little bit different. But I chose to align these rear mounting holes with the seat bolt because underneath the Jeep is actually a cross member here that's attached to the body. That gives the body a lot of rigidity. If you bolt straight into just like the sheet metal of a Jeep like this, there's a good chance in a real tough scenario that I hope we never find to ourselves to be in, there's a good chance that you can just rip these bolts right through the sheet metal like that. So I want to make sure this thing is stout and it's not going to go anywhere. So here's a look at under the Jeep. Yeah, you see that cross member right there? That's what we're going to tie into. You can see our mounting holes right there. So that's going to help a lot. And then up here, we're just in front of this cross member.
Here comes the battle cry. Here comes the battle cry.
So one trick for when you're welding, if you're going to weld all these bolts to these plates, drop the plate on the top. Like put the plate on top of this fuel cell here, and then drop your bolts through the holes in the fuel cell. I found that there's a little bit of play. I aligned mine using, like, you know, obviously the top ring, if this went here. I aligned mine not on the fuel cell, and these holes have a little bit of play, but the holes in the fuel cell are more precise, and so I had a really hard time fitting these bolts back up through the holes. So align everything on the fuel cell and tack everything on the fuel cell. Just put some tape over the aluminum so you don't ruin it. So I just drilled my holes in the mounting plate and then just laid that in here to get my holes lined up. And I made sure to hit them with some paint. And now I'm going to peel this tape off and we're going to get this thing mounted. Alright, so as you can see, we got the fuel pump out. This thing looks to be like brand spanking new. There's still a tag on the wiring here. It's a Chrysler part, but it looks like the whole thing is brand new. The wires are not even like, it's pretty crazy. Look how good that looks. So that's really good. I was gonna replace this whole thing, but now we don't have to. So this being an 03, we're gonna rob a couple other things like the rollover vent and this thing over here and a hose or two, and then this thing is going in the trash. All right, so here's a look at the studs coming up from inside. And now in a perfect world, that plate, that Motobilt mounting plate, will just sit right on top of these. And then I got the sway bar bushings, go right on there. Plate, fuel cell, isolated from the body, and looking good. Let me give you a look underneath. So here's a look underneath at the plates. You can see how much more surface area that gives you than just a washer would, especially this one, which is inside of the cross member that happens to find itself on the body there. So I feel really confident that that was never going to like pull up and out, and it should give this thing plenty of clamping force. The other good thing about having the threads up is that you're tightening the nut and not tightening the bolt, and you can actually get more torque that way on these bolts. All right, so we got our base plate bolted in there. It was a little bit of a challenge to get all the bolt holes to line up, but in the end, she's in there. Looks really good. Really happy with how these sway bar end link bushings just kind of fit in there and hold everything. So I feel really confident that that's not going to move anywhere. And so now we can work on getting our pump and the cap on the cell. I think it's going to be easier to work on that stuff while it's down, and then we can take that whole assembly, place it on there. We got the brackets being painted. I'm actually, this is going to be a couple days later now from when I started filming this video, so these have had plenty of time to dry, and I think they're going to look pretty good. So this part is really pretty straightforward. I just really wanted to show how I mounted the fuel cell because I think that's a pretty good way of doing it. And so yeah, I think I'm just gonna like throw pretty much all this stuff together, and then I'll kind of update you guys after that. Another key note to keep in mind here is that I'm using this Permatex Formagasket number 2. It's a slow drying non-hardening sealant, and so it claims to resist fuel and things like that. And so I think this is going to be the better option compared to the rubber gasket that they provide. So yeah, I'm going to glob this around like at all the bolt holes and then do a seal around. And I don't know. You guys can check back in a couple years from now and leave a comment and see how this stuff worked. Alright, so now that we got our filler and pump mounted, I'm ready to take the whole entire cell and we're going to put it in the Jeep over there. This is how it came out. I could spend all day trying to clean this thing up beautifully, but it's going to get covered up in a future project. And also, I'd rather have too much sealant on here. You can see it kind of came up through some of the bolt holes here, and that is totally fine. The more vapor and like physical liquids that I can seal out, the better off I'll be. So this is how I'm going to leave it. It really doesn't look too bad at all. I'm not too concerned about it. And so now it's time to lift the cell into the Jeep and put it on that plate. But there's one thing that I'm actually, it actually held me up a day or two in this whole project. I needed to run and get some sort of like insulation for that thing because I didn't want to put the aluminum cell right on top of steel. So I went and just got this, it's literally called insulation tape. It's just R1 insulation tape, and it's a real thin, like foam layer. And I'm just gonna kind of line the cell, well, not really the cell, probably more the mounts with this stuff. I'll just stick it right on there, and that'll help with vibrations and just chafing over time. All right, so now that we have the mounting of the fuel cell complete, all nice and pretty. This is the tricky part that people don't really, this seems to be the hardest part. So the fittings. I'm using fittings from Color Fittings, literally Color Fittings. There you go. So here we have the 3/8, just quick connect right onto the fuel pump. And then we have a -8 AN cap. Again, in gold, it looks pretty nice with the rollover valve and the zinc coating on the cap. And then we're gonna run a -6 fuel line down into the hole over there, and this is going to go to the 5/16 quick connect, which will hit the frame right up there. I do plan on trimming this stuff, but for now I want to get this thing going. We're going to go to the silver fitting, and that is actually smaller than the pump. So you need a 5/16 and a 3/8 quick connect to complete your fuel feed. All right, so quick connect fitting, super easy to use. Go right on the end of there. Bam, that's it, done. On there, pretty good. And then here's our AN line that we just made. That goes on the end of there. And then you're good to go. Okay, so now that we have the cell hooked up, we're all good to go, except for one thing. The 03 to 06 TJs have emissions stuff. And so basically in your rear quarter panel back here will be this contraption. And basically, I don't really know what this thing is, but this is a big charcoal canister. And this basically recycles gasoline vapors. And I don't really know what that does for you. I guess it keeps stuff from going out in the environment and recycles some of the fuel into your system. So this has a whole series of tubes and hoses and things that run down the gas tank. And we're not going to use all of them in my case. I'll show you what I did really quick. In my case, I just went ahead and put caps on the two lines that come back from the engine. Now, I don't think this will pass emissions that way. There will be a check engine light. And at the very least, what I'm going to try is to plug in this module in the trunk with the plug that comes around. But if you're curious about how to hook this thing up, on the fuel tank, there is a junction, I'm going to call it. And it looks like this thing. Has a quick connect there. And it's got a whole bunch of these plastic lines going to it that I actually cut off. And I labeled where each one of these things goes. And I'm wondering if I can get a good shot here. You can probably screenshot these things. You can probably screenshot that, and that way you have your junction here, and you'll be able to use all this up. And then obviously this is pretty straightforward. If you have your tank dropped, you can just follow where the lines go from your frame through, and you'll be able to figure it out. You just need a series of probably just rubber hoses, honestly. You don't really have to go ahead and make AN lines or anything fancy. Just rubber push on, zip ties, or hose clamps will be more than enough. I am going to hook mine up eventually. Don't think it's necessary for me right now. This thing is mostly going to be driven on the trails. And so that being said, the fuel cell is complete. You guys will have to check back for the first start. I'm waiting on my transfer case to come back. But you'll have to check back and see how everything is holding up. I am super excited to get this thing going. She looks real pretty back here. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. If you have any questions, let me know down below, or go find me on Instagram at I'd Rather Be Jeepin'. Also go check out I'd Rather Be Wheeling. Link in the description, and go get yourself something nice.